So as we are getting ready, or some of you already got started, the Lab 7.2 is actually in the module for week 9. Okay. And then I will add the assignment before my next class, at the end of this class today. I have most of it completed and I just don't have time to upload it. Yesterday was really crazy. All right. So take a look at the lab. So your option today, and if you have extra time today, I encourage you to, use one of the routers. We only have 1, 2, 3, I think four routers total. So that's why, and we have more switches. Two are a little older, and then some are newer. So we are going to open up Device Manager, and you are going to take a look at your COM port. It should show your COM port here. If you're using the StarTech cable, it will say prolific, right? I made sure that the IT team tested it because they were like, well, why don't you come back next week and test it? So make sure that it shows the COM port. It's on to USB. It's on here. Okay, it's not on here today. All right. So for the COM port, we just want to make sure that we set it for the right one, and then we are going to open up PuTTY. I don't have PuTTY installed on here. That's interesting. They wipe it. All right. So if you don't have PuTTY, you can download PuTTY. And for PuTTY, you just gotta select the right installer. So for 64-bit, it's this one. Okay, so make sure that we connect onto the console port, not the other ports in the front or on the router that will be also in the back. It will say console on it. Make sure you connect it that way. Okay. So we should be good. Then once you install PuTTY, or you have PuTTY, you're going to open that up. And then in the PuTTY, what we will do is we are going to set up your serial port. Okay, let me double check mine. I think it's 6. And then we want to set this as 11.5.200. And then once you have that set up, you can check and make sure that serial here. Select the speed, click open. you should see that, okay? If it shows just a black screen, press enter a couple of times, it should detect your speed. Okay, and I'm sorry, it's really tiny because that's how console is gonna be. So username and password will be Cisco. I'll wait for some of you to get there. So what did I do? I had found my COM port, and you would use your device manager to do that, okay? And it will be all different depending on where you plug your USB into your system. So if your cable somehow doesn't work, I did bring USB-C cable back up. I ended up buying like 20 different types of cables. All right, but I did buy some additional StarTech one. Those are not as cheap as the USB-C ones, surprisingly. Maybe it's where they're manufactured. You can use Putty. If you don't have Putty, download Putty. I thought they installed Putty here, but they didn't. So we gotta have a chat with the IT department again. Okay. In Putty, you need to go to sessions and make sure that you have serial on your COM port. And then in your serial, make sure that we set it at 115200 with the 8 data bits, and the stop bit is 1. Okay. And then it's going to pull up. It's going to look all black. Just press enter a couple of times, and you should see username and password. Okay. Now, like I said, if you want to reset on the catalyst, there might be a power button. You just hold it down for about 30 seconds. It's going to flash all lights, and it's going to reset. On these newer switches, the reset button is right next to your blinking light in the front face. There's a little hole. So you just use like a pin, or, you know, just like how you reset your phone or something like that. You would press it and hold it down for about 10 seconds. All the lights are going to blink, and then it wipes everything and it puts it back to manufacturer settings. Okay, so when we're in it, you can log in using Cisco and Cisco. Okay. And then it asks you for changing password. We're not going to do that. So put no. So I'm on a slightly different switch than yours. I think the two up front, Alma and Jarrell, they're using those. They're the same as the version that I'm using, which is the 550. Some of you are using the cart ones. Those are the 350. So the 350 SX and the 550 SX is pretty close. They use the same command. The OS is going to be the same. Now, these can be configured with GUI. Okay. You just use a browser, and then you can download their app and install it, and then you can use it to configure it. But we're going to learn CLI. Okay. So where am I at on here? I had logged in. Cisco, and as you notice that it already have the hash symbol, so it's already been enabled. On the newer switches, it will do that, but on the catalyst, you have to enable it in order to get to the, and then in order to get to the privilege mode. Okay, so here we are going to do a show interfaces status. And why do we need to check this first? We want to see what kind of ports, right? Because they all look like Ethernet to me, but I wanted to see what kind of speed am I working with. So yours is going to be a little bit different. Some of you have the catalyst switch. It might show fast Ethernet, right? And then you might have a couple gigabit. On the newer switches, they are all gigabits in the front, okay? And then if you look at the more, there should be a couple on the side. Those are going to be fiber. Okay. So you do see I have two. The telecommunication one, it's a combo, right? And then there is going to be one fiber on the bottom there. And then, so I have 2 fiber and 2 tele. Right, so there are 2 combo there. So those are the ones in the front right here. On the side, right, if you have the 350, which is a little smaller, you might have a couple of those. Okay, so the newer switches have different faster ports. That's what I'm trying to share. Okay, so I have the gigabit Ethernet. I have the combo, which is for telephone communication via Ethernet, and then I have the fiber. And you want to make note of how it's naming these ports, because when you access the interface, you have to make sure that you type it the same. Okay. All right. So now what I'm going to do next is I'm going to do a show interface. Show IP interface. So we're going to do a show IP interface. So because we're in the privileged exec mode, you want to display things, right? You can view and you can maybe enable a couple of things, but when you configure, you got to go into the actual port itself and configure. So on your switch, you should have a default VLAN, which is tied to the default address. Then you also have one, so there's going to be a DHCP and a default VLAN. Okay, and both of these are disabled. That's what comes out of the box. What we'll do is we're going to add new VLANs to it, to the actual port, so we can group, you know, we can also group the ports, but we can add the VLAN to it. And then we are going to set those VLANs for like a subnetwork. Okay, so is there a default IP address? Yes. Right, 192.168. I believe it is 1.254. And then is there a VLAN? Yes, VLAN 1. All right, so after we looked at the interface, and you always want to take a look at what's happening with your IP address and how many ports do you have. You know that, you know, these are 24, 48 ports, whatever, but you want to know what kind of ports they have. So on the new switch, you don't have to use config term. You can just say config and it will take you there, right? But the original way with the older switches, you want to say config term. So the command config would work, or config term would work. Okay. So now once you hit config term, you are in the configuration of that switch. Okay. And then let's give it a name. So you can say host name S1, S2, S25, whatever your favorite number is, put it there. Okay. So host name S, let's say I wanted to use 330, right? So now you notice that it changed your switch name to 30. So that's how you can rename your switch real quick. Okay. And we want to schematically use the number that makes sense in our network, right? Don't just pick a favorite number, but so yeah, we wanted to use it for, and you can name however you wanted to name that makes sense for the business. Then you are going to look at the first interface. Now you can pick the type of interface you want, but I want you to practice using. So I'm going to pick this one, which is, it says GI1/0/1. And this is a copper, right? We're going to use that interface and we are going to do something with it. So you can say interface. Oh yeah, if you type it wrong, you have to retype it. It doesn't backspace well. And then GI1/0/1. So once you have selected that interface, it's gonna take you and it's gonna say config IF, right? Interface. That's what it is. Okay? And if you don't have that port, just replace it with like fast Ethernet or whichever port that you would have available. And then we're going to give it an address. And I wanted to use the class A this time. So you have a little bit more experience with class A. And sorry, I skipped 23 there. So we're going to do IP address. Okay. And then you can give it an address 10.1.0.1. Oh, I typed it wrong. So mine's going to be 10.0.0.1. Okay. Oh, I forgot the subnet mask. 255.0.0.0. You have to include the subnet mask with it. Otherwise, it doesn't take it. Are we doing okay? All right. So once we set the IP address for that port, we're going to enable or we're going to access the VLAN database and we're going to set up VLAN for that port. Okay. So we are going to do a VLAN database. Dang it. There you go. So now you are in VLAN mode, right? That's how you can use VLAN interface. And then you are going to give it a name. We're going to create a VLAN called VLAN 20. And if you want to create more VLAN on that port, you can, right? Or you can go into a second port and you can make another VLAN there. Okay. So what does that mean? When I'm connecting my network to that particular port, which is the first port, what that will do is that I can now create a virtual local area network. So now I can connect a switch to it, and then the baby switch, that's going to be like, let's say 4 computers. Those 4 computers are on a separate virtual network, you see? And then I can take the next port and then I can connect another switch to it, let's say the Netgear switch, and I connect a bunch of other computers to the Netgear switch. The second port is going to be on a separate local virtual network, right? So that's how you can separate, right, these little departments or group of computers through a logical switch configuration as VLAN. You just identify it, and then so now that port is going to be that address that I give it. So I just got to make sure that all the other computers that I'm connecting to that switch to that port is going to be in that subnet. Okay, so that subnet mask and the IP address is going to be important. Yes, John. Huh? I'm sorry. On the catalyst, use the 9600. On the old catalyst switch, use 9600 baud, because on the newer one, it's higher signal, it's higher speed. All right. So once we have the VLAN, we want to get out of the VLAN mode now, right? Okay. So you just do an exit. And then once we're here, so you want to get back into the VLAN mode, the configuration of that particular VLAN, right? Like I wanted to get, so the physical port, I tell it that it's 10 dot whatever, what was it? I typed in mine 00.1, right? So what I want to do is I want to follow this up, okay, with a separate, so now let's logically think about that. If your port here, right, on this switch, the physical port is, let's say, the 10.1.1.0.1 here, okay? So the subnet is, or the network is here, and then the rest is the host. If I use a .2 here, it's still on the same network, right? Because it just now becomes a separate host. So what you need to do is before you configure VLAN, you've got to make sure that your subnet range is ready, okay? So if you want to isolate that port for VLAN 20, just use a separate address, a different address that you would want to make sure that they're on a different network. Now your switch should be able to handle fine if it's layer 3 and 4 switch. We normally use this, you know, for like telephone and stuff like that. So that way we would have, you know, different divisions and things for, and you can also hook telephone up to, you know, another switch and then connect it and treat it as a VLAN. So there are many ways that you can do this. Okay, so we can group everybody onto the port that we had set up, which is actually we are going to set up, which is a .2. So all of those computer, you just got to make sure that it's going to be on this network. Okay? All right. So now we're going to do interface VLAN 20 that we're in it. Okay? So we are now actually accessing the VLAN. Okay? Then we're going to give it an address. IP address 10. I think I used .0 earlier, but I'm going to just use this 10.2.1. Sorry, I forgot .0.1. I'm just going to use this, a little different than yours. And then follow it up with a subnet mask, always. Okay, oh, it says it's duplicating that. It didn't like that. Let's try it again. IP address. So we're going to do 10. 2. So network. So let's change the subnet mask. So we'll just do a .2.1.2. I'm just going to use a .2 for VLAN 2. I hated that they took away the erase option. And then we're going to do 255.254.0. So now I'm on a different subnet. Okay. A specified subnet that's overlapped. Okay, that's fine. Yeah, it didn't like the fact that this is the network address for this is overlapping with the other network. Okay, so I will have to do additional configuration to set up the network address a little bit differently on this one. So to fix this, we probably have to use something like 11.2.0.1. Let's rewrite that. Such a hard. 11.2.0.1. Okay, it takes it now. So on this step right here, use 11 or 12 or something that's different than the network, because that's your network ID, and if you're using the subnet mask, it's gonna look at that network ID. So the way VLAN is designed is that it needs to be separate network, right? It needs to route to it. All right, and then you can do an N. N takes us back to the preview mode. Okay. And then we are going to do a show VLAN. So now you should see your VLAN 20 down here. Okay. And then so what it's doing is that you have a separate VLAN 20, and logically it's going to tie to this port, but it's not going to pin itself to this port. It's going to see it as a different port, you see? So now you have a VLAN, a separate VLAN. All right. Then take a screen capture of that. And then we are going to have to repeat and make a second VLAN. So use like 13 here. And you can do it with the CIDR number instead of doing the whole IP address with the subnet mask. So I'm going to do that. So now I'm going to go back to do config. Okay. And then next, I'm going to go ahead and select my next port, right? So I can use, let's say, so on the VLAN 1, it's grouping this one. And you can use the next port up, right? Like the .1, .0. So I'm going to do a 3, 0, and 1. So interface GI3, 0, and then IP address. And then we can give it an IP. What was it? Say we give it a 30. Oh, 255. What does it say? Sorry. I don't know why it's putting the L in front of my ambiguous command. Thank you so much. Exit. All right, let me get back to that. Okay, so we are going to do a VLAN 30. And then now we can do IP address. We are going to do 13.0.0. I'm just going to give it a .3 like that. Oh, keep forgetting the subnet mask. Or you can do a slash. Oh, it didn't like that. Was it a VLAN address? Oh, I forgot. After that, you have to do interface VLAN 30, and then you do an IP address. Oh. Slash. Huh. Oh, I see why. Duh. I had a 1D instead of 2D on the address. I had a typo. Going in circle. Yeah, I know. Let me see. Let's see, zoom in on this. The maximum here. Anybody know the function key for Windows to zoom? I'm sorry? Yeah, I don't know if it's gonna work. No, yeah, it's on the app. It doesn't. Okay, so where we left off, right? We created a VLAN, so you have to go into the config mode. Then you are going to make a VLAN, right? You don't have to do VLAN database. If you're in the config, you can say VLAN and then the name. And then you are going to interface it. And then you are going to give it an address. So you need to repeat that and you need to make it for the next one. And I want, I know that I type in 10 dot whatever, but you need to make sure that it's in a separate network. Otherwise, it's not going to take it. And then you are going to end and you're going to show. Okay, so here I'm going to go ahead and click end. And then I'm going to show VLAN. And so now I have a 20 and a 30 on the bottom. Okay, so just follow the steps and use different network ranges. Otherwise, it's not gonna, it overlaps. You can't have it overlap, but then you have to fix other things. So just make the network ID different. Okay, so take a screen capture. And then so now you can pick a different interface. And we're gonna do a switch port trunk mode. So what this will do is it's gonna, I put the information here for what a trunk port would be. Now, not all switches can support trunk. Some of the older ones or some of the switch, that just doesn't have this feature. So this is a port that you would allow the data to flow across the network node to multiple virtual local area networks. Since we already have our 2 VLANs, we want to trunk it. So what that will do is it's a middleman between your appliance and your VLANs, okay? So what do I mean? So I know we mentioned earlier that we're going to connect the switches to this and we're going to group those computers. But then what you want to do is you want to logically configure an interface of the appliance to communicate between VLAN 20 and VLAN 30, you see? Because how is it going to be able to communicate? Because there's no virtual connection, right? You have to trunk it so that way 20 can talk to 30 and 30 can talk to 40 and 50 and so on, right? So that's the trunk port. It's used, so we have to use a physical port to logically configure it to communicate across the VLAN. So whenever, and also your virtual networks too. So if you simulate a virtual network using like vSphere or like from VMware or whatever, right? You still have to configure your network appliances to support that. Okay. So let's go back to the config mode. And then we are going to select another interface. And so I will go back to this right here and be able to do that. Okay. So now how do I select? Well, you want to take a look at the speed and also your physical connection too, right? So if you want to go a little faster, then you use the fiber. But usually we would use these two right here to connect out to our fiber box. Okay. So I'll just pick the next one so it's easy for you to practice. So I'm going to do this one, the 4. Okay. So gig 104. So we're going to do interface GI 1/0/4. And we're in the configuration. Then you just have to use this command. You are going to do switch port mode trunk. Oh, sorry, I mistyped that. As you get older, these commands are just getting smaller. Just so hard to see, even with my glasses on. Okay. All right. So once you do that, what that does is it's going to activate that port, that physical port number 4 for my trunk. Okay. And then now we are going to make sure that we tie the VLANs together. So we are going to do a switch port mode access. So we're going to enable it. And let's do like the 20 here, so it makes more sense because we did 20 and 30. So we're going to do switch port access VLAN 30. Or 20. And I'll do the same thing. I'll do the same thing for 20. Switch port access VLAN. Okay, so what we're doing is we are going to allow the virtual local area network 20 and 30 accessing that, but you don't have to. You know, as you saw in your note, you can do for one specific VLAN, or you can allow it for multiple VLANs. So what I put here is that the access mode can be untagged, right, by most single VLAN, and the VLAN interface configuration reassigns the interface to a different VLAN that currently belongs to the VLAN 10. So what that will do is it's going to logically assign that port, right, as a member of the VLAN, whichever that you give it, 10, 20, 30. So that way we would be able to trunk it, okay? That is going to be, logically, it's going to flow the data through that port in order for the VLAN to talk or our network to talk. And so that's how you trunk, okay? So we always set up trunks for VLANs, usually, okay? And normally this section right here in a regular like routing and switching class, I normally spend like a week or two on it at least, right? So I'm just giving you the Cliff Note version, so forgive me, right? Because your chapter only talks about like what a VLAN is and so on. So the switching and routing class, it goes in depth on like setting up, you know, the actual devices and getting it to talk and stuff like that. Okay, so if you want to practice VLAN, you can set up a bunch of them and see if you can, you know, connect system and communicate. All right, so we can set up a VLAN and then the address. But if you already did 20 and 30, you don't have to do that one. All right, so since your switches are layer 4 switches, we're gonna do routing with it. Okay, so we are gonna do an IP routing command. So and we can use that same port. Okay, so remember that I'm in that interface, otherwise you have to set a different interface. So the command that we're using is IP routing. What that does is it's enable route for that device, okay? And then you are gonna bring in the protocol that you want it to route. So depending on the type of protocol that's supported by that switch, some switch support RIP version 1 only, some routers support version 1 only, some router version support version 2 and up, and then some Cisco switches only support, you know, IRG, and then the other ones would support EIRGP, right, the enhanced version. So you have to read the spec in order to do that. But since we've done packet tracer with RIP, I wanted to use this. So you're going to do router RIP. Okay, and simply doing that, it allows you to use RIP, right, which is routing information protocol. And of course it's old. So it uses distance vector to route, and it's going to look at the matrix for the hops, just like how the analogy is how many streets you cross before you get to your work, right, or home. So what it does is it's going to build the routing matrix based on the number of hops in that path from start to end. So the largest number is going to be a certain value, which is 15. So anything above 15, it's not going to do, right? So we have other protocol that's going to handle for the larger network. That's why RIP is used for the smaller networks. Okay. So then after that, you are going to do the network. So this is going to set that interface for a certain IP. Oh, yeah, I see why now. Okay. So I do that already. Oh, because I changed the IP. So let's do network. What was this one? 13 dot. Sorry, I'm trying to track 13.0.0. So whatever IP that you use for that port, you have to follow it up with that IP. Otherwise, it's not going to take. So if you try to put in the 10 here and you have used a different IP up here, right? Like this one, it will not take. So make sure that it matches. So I should put match IP with okay, now then we are going to use that same IP. So match IP number 29. Okay. So once you set that, you are going to interface into it, and then you're going to do an offset. So what it does is it creates a matrix offset. That means that 2 hops from it, right? It's gonna use that to really look at. It's kind of like you want to see the traffic is gonna be 2 streets from your house for your path to work, and that's how it's gonna be able to see, right? So 2 hops, 2 distance from it. So we are going to do, since we're in RIP, we're going to do an interface. I'm in the cap. Oh. Let's try the actual interface. So GI1/0/4. Okay. So let's fix that. Sorry, sometimes I get sleepy and I skip stuff. So we're gonna do the same to match. Okay, then we can do an IP RIP offset. Hold on a second. Okay, it took it that time. All right, so I see why. I have a step that. So when you did this here, right, you have to do interface IP, okay, and then you are going to do the IP address that's going to be match IP from number 29, just like the previous one. So whatever the IP that you set for the network here, you are going to interface IP here, okay? And then once you have that, then you are going to do a IP rip offset. Let me see, it will take that now. All right. And it should take that now. And then you would go N, and then you should be able to see your rip setting after that. So we should have the IP interface and stuff that we enable, and the offset would be 2 there. So if it doesn't take, it's probably because I probably left off the IP here. So show IP and then put in the IP address that you used previously. And then after that, you can do the RIP. So what you're doing here is you're setting up the property for that protocol at that interface with that IP address. And the way the command is used is because it's many layered. We enable RIP, and then we have to go into the interface in order to do that. Okay. Okay. And then we want to do the last one, which is show VLAN. So now I should see my interface tied with my VLAN. And then I have 2 VLANs, so that should show there. And then we would also look at show IP interface free. I always have a typo. Show IP. Take this out. Okay, so just show interface IP interface. That's good. So it should show you all the VLANs that you had set up are up there. It's different than the first one that you did after you configured. So you should have at least a couple of VLANs, if not 3. And then there's no directed broadcast, right? There's no redirections. The status is valid. And the first one, that's the default. It should be not received. So you should have a few VLANs set up and everything there. So compared to when we first started, we only have the default IP and the VLAN, the default VLAN, which is VLAN 1. So the one that's teaching CIS27A this semester, Mr. Khalid Rubai, he does a lot of networking at his college as well. So I'm debating whether I should teach that class online only or using hybrid. So we'll see how that's going to work. Okay, questions? Oh, because in your router rip section, let me see. That one I think you have to do the interface before. So did you enable routing? IP routing and it took it fine? Yes. Oh, are you in the VLAN mode? If not, you have to go into another interface or the same interface. So do interface. So it has to be tied to the maybe it has to. That's fine. Which one is that? For those of you who are using the 350X, I'm gonna look it up. Because sometimes it doesn't, it supports like their protocol, so. I downloaded the commands and stuff for these routers, but it's general for the series. It doesn't tell you. Yes, so this one support voice deployment, hardware specifications. So it does spanning tree. You can use it for multicast TV VLANs, selective Q and Qs. You can tunnel layer 2, so that's supported. You can make it so this chapter, it talks about the HCP relay, right? So you can use it for the HCP relay, IGMP. Yep. It doesn't have it. So if you're using the 350, it's not going to do the RIP. So that's fine. Yeah. On some of the, yeah, most of the older ones, if it's layer 4 and up, you know. So in place of that, you would see what it's supporting, right? So here it talks about routing version 4 for the interface. You can use VLAN, loopback, or lag. Okay. So I like for you to put your name on yours. Come away. Post it on yours, so because some of them are almost the same. So that way I don't mix them up. And then the next time if we use it, you can just, you would know. But we can always check the configuration you set. So if you don't remember what you had set, you can always go to that, right? So this is really on the 350. For those of you who are using the rack with 350, you won't get to this part. Okay, so 39 and 40 and 41 is okay for this section. And then you can't show the RIP. Okay, but you can do show route. If you do set a route, just like how we use packet tracer, right? You can enable route and so on. So we should have new VLANs. We should have new VLAN showing on the interface. And then we also set trunk for it. So you can do a trunk port or the default port. So working with the switch, the best thing is to learn how to do VLANs and then use it as a router. Okay. If we're done, we can unplug our network appliances and then I'll put them away and just leave it where you're sitting. So I think these are actually better than the ones that you're using. They're cheaper too, half price. So $10 for the USB-C. And this is there are like quite a few companies that sell this. This one is the OIK1 6-feet USB Type-C cable for Cisco console. You just have to install the FTDI chipset on it, right? The driver. You're good to go. I tested the Starcom last night on